Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. How do you picture the baby Jesus in the manger? If you are like me, children's Bible story books pictures might shape the way you imagine it in your mind. We might see scenes of a starlit manger with the baby Jesus surrounded by a warm glow, with a happy smile on his face and an adoring Mary kneeling nearby with her hands folded in prayer, and protective Joseph standing watch over them both. In our mind's eye, we may see shepherds and sheep, and perhaps camels and kings bearing gifts. There may be angels in our image, and certainly a star overhead shining down a beam of light over the whole thing. It's beautiful. It's serene. It's peaceful. And it's also unlikely. This week, as we draw close to Christmas, we're going to look at the nativity story in each of our four Gospels. We're going to look at the birth of Jesus as told first by Mark, then Matthew, then John, and finally Luke, which is the story we are most familiar with. But before we do that, before we look at what is really there in the story, we need to take a breath and perhaps consider how some of the things we picture at the scene are indeed a bit unlikely and come not from the Bible, but from tradition. For example, I have seen something recently that I'll bet you've seen too. It says, Mary, exhausted, having just gotten Jesus to sleep, is approached by a young man who thinks to himself, what this girl needs is a drum solo. Well, no. But that little saying points out two things that we may have in our minds that are pretty unlikely to have happened. First, there's nothing in the Bible about a little drummer boy. It's a great song, but it's not part of the Bible story of the birth of Jesus. And while we're at it, perhaps we need to rethink our vision of a calm and serene Mary kneeling at the side of the golden glowing manger. Giving birth is hard and exhausting, and the birth of Jesus was just as real as any other birth. And so while Mary may have felt a lot of joy, she was probably pretty tired and badly in need of rest. Often our mental pictures of Bethlehem, or what we see of Bethlehem, show us a city shrouded in snow. Well, that's pretty unlikely too. First, Jerusalem and Charleston here in South Carolina are on the same latitude, so the weather we have here is pretty much the weather they have there. It's pretty unusual for us to have snow at Christmas, and it was pretty unusual for them too. Even more, the only time shepherds were in the fields at night was when the sheep were calving, and that occurs in the springtime. So it's much more likely that Jesus was born in the springtime, making snow even more unlikely. Let's consider a few more. We might picture three kings, but in fact, the Bible calls them magi, which were probably something more like astrologers than kings. We think of three of them only because there were three gifts. We don't know how many of them there really were. There were no talking animals at the stable where Mary and Joseph were staying. Probably in the stable where they were staying, probably smelled of hay and all sorts of other animal smells. Finally, in Bethlehem at that time, most stables weren't freestanding structures. Rather, they herded their animals into small caves and shut a gate across the entrance. That's the likely scene for Jesus' birth. Now, I don't tell you all these things to destroy your beautiful image of the first Christmas. I mention them to get us ready to put some of those things out of our minds as we prepare to hear what the gospel writers do say about the birth of Jesus. And perhaps by getting the stories and traditions out of the way, we are more prepared to be caught in the wonder, the mystery, and the joy of what God is doing in the birth of this child. It's okay to hold on to these traditions and stories too. All of them point to the miracle of Jesus. Glory to the newborn King. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.